Apple reported its first quarter beating on both its top and bottom lines, citing staggering iPhone demand. Let's get more on this now from an analyst who is bullish on the stock, Dan Ives, managing director and global head of tech research at Wedbush. Dan, thanks as always for joining us.
Great to be here.
So the bullish hasn't changed. What jumped out from these results? What did you like? What are you a little concerned about?
Look, I mean, iPhone numbers were, I think that was even better than best case. I mean, if you look at China, that's now been a real big tailwind. There was a headwind. Services was really strong. Look, I think the only blemish is just given the increasing cost of memory, you'll have, maybe some pressure for Apple over the coming quarters, when it comes to margins. But I think actually they're going to be able to hold that pretty strong. Look, I think the stock being sort of flattish to down, it's really about the AI strategy. That's what investors are focused on.
And they're working, though, on that. They hopefully are trying to get back into the game with Google. Do you feel that's the right way to go and it's the solution?
Well, I think that's the only way to go. I mean, the reality is they were late to the game. They watch it from the stands. It's a fourth industrial revolution. That's been the frustration as an Apple investor that you've seen, from investors. And I think it really comes down to they need to be aggressive when it comes to AI, Google, as well as outside talent, as well as acquisitions.
What do you think happened that they were so hesitant on that?
I think it's part of the DNA in Cupertino, where they're just close to the vest, don't do acquisitions. I think it was a strategic misstep. I think Cook's recognized it, and now it's about turning that around.
And you think he can? You think doing this will be what they need?
Look, it's the biggest install base in the world when it comes to consumer. You have 1.5 billion iOS devices. Of those that are iPhones, 2.5 billion when you put it all together, and that they have the biggest install base in the world. Now, I think monetization can be $75 to $100 per share when it comes to the AI monetization opportunity.
So there are the opportunities. Let's go back to China. What did they do right in China?
I think pent-up demand was there. Look, iPhone 17 has actually been under the radar, almost a sleepy, massive upgrade cycle. And I think China, we've seen the strength there front and center. I think there was geopolitical tension as well, which hurt them if you think about over the last year, and that's settled. Look, Tim Cook's 10% politician, 90% CEO.
And North America, how's it comparing with China when it comes to sales?
I mean, I think okay. Look, obviously more maturity there. You're waiting for a significant hardware upgrade. Are you going to have a flip phone, in terms of the foldable phone that you could see come out, in September? But the reality for Apple from a stock, AI is really going to be the swing factor for the stock in terms of them monetizing a subscription service as the consumer AI revolution ultimately goes through Apple.
And what does Apple need to do with the AI? What do you want to see from them as a functioning AI on their phones?
Well, you need a subscription service. And I think that's what Google obviously is helping out with Gemini. You need to lay out the strategy for developers. And you need ultimately to be the platform. Think about everything that OpenAI is doing. Google, go to Microsoft. I mean, across the board, Anthropic and others. Apple cannot be from the outside looking in terms of the fourth industrial revolution.
Now, any concerns that people are going to wait for that and sales may slump again?
Look, I mean, there have been some concerns about that. I think that quarter last night put some of that to bed. I think if you look at the next few quarters, it's going to be pretty stable demand. And then it really comes down to, can they execute, keep margins intact, and then ultimately monetize on AI? That's really the game plan for Tim Cook and Apple in 2026.
What's the key thing then for keeping the margins in line then?
I mean, they're probably going to have to raise prices. iPhone 18, probably $100, $150. Look, around the edges, they could cut and they could absorb some of that as well. But especially with tariffs and just rising prices on chips, they're going to have to raise prices.
And where do you see that? Where do you see that ending up? And will the consumers have a stomach for that?
Yeah, I mean, there'll be some maybe churn, pretty minimal, probably 1-2%. But they'll probably raise $100, $150 on the Pro and on the Pro Max going into iPhone 18. But for them, it's really going to be, I think, less of an issue from a margin perspective and making sure that there's a balancing act in terms of making sure that they don't hurt demand too much at this important stage.
And what kind of headwinds could there be coming up in the next 6 months, next year?
Look, I think the biggest overall headwinds are just executing on their AI strategy.
That's it. It all comes back to AI, right?
Look, because it's the boy that cried wolf, right? I mean, in other words, every year investors are patient. 2026, rubber meets the road.
So they got to show up with their AI. All right, Dan, thanks very much for joining us. We appreciate it. Dan Ives is Managing Director and Senior Equity Research Analyst covering the tech sector at Wedbush.